Walmart has the trusted brands and products your kids need for school.
Like HP Chromebooks?
Yep.
Reebok hoodies?
Yep.
Pokemon pencil cases?
I think you know the answer, but just in case, yes. Go back in style with Walmart.
Auto insurance can all seem the same until it comes time to use it. So don't get stuck paying more for less coverage. Switch to USAA Auto Insurance and you could start saving money in no time. Get a quote today. Restrictions apply.
Hello and welcome to History for Weirdos.
We're your hosts, Andrew
and Stephanie.
And each week, we're going to take you on a journey into the strange, obscure, and relentlessly entertaining corners of human history.
Now listen up, friends, because it's about to get weird.
Weirdos, welcome back to another episode of History for Weirdos.
Woohoo!
We're glad to be back as always. This week is a pretty exciting week, at least in my opinion, because one, it's your turn to tell a story, and secondly, it's a story about something that I find incredibly fascinating. One, like the ancient world.
Yep.
And especially in like the Hellenistic post-Alexander world, which is a very fascinating time frame.
I chose this subject for a few different reasons, but one of them was definitely to try to impress you.
Oh, I mean, I'm already impressed because this is a deep cut, guys. This is a really deep cut. This is not like your surface level weirdo here.
Yeah, no, and this was just very gratifying episode to write, even though, as we'll see, we don't have a ton of details of the life or the thoughts of our main subject today. Her world and her impact is fascinating.
I'm really, really curious because I don't know a lot about her.
Well, you're about to learn.
About to find out. Nice.
Weirdos, we've all heard of Cleopatra, right?
Of course.
What would you say you think of when you think of Cleopatra, actually?
I think of like Pharaoh of Egypt, the last Pharaoh of Egypt. She has these romances with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. She like kills her brother. She is the last in line of like 3,000 years of ancient Egyptian history.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I think about.
Yeah. I wrote that we've all heard of Cleopatra. She's famous Egyptian queen, or more accurately, Pharaoh, as you said, who made both Julius Caesar and Mark Antony fall in love with her. I think we think of her as being very charming.
Yes.
Very smart. I think on the negative side, people may interpret her as manipulative, even.
Or devious.
Devious.
Yes.
I don't agree with that, but I think that's definitely how we've seen her portrayed. And her legacy extends far beyond like these sort of romanticized images. She really, in and of herself, was such a powerful person. She is a testament to female leadership, especially in a patriarchal world.
Okay.
And her world would have been very patriarchal, right?
Yeah, that's fairly true.
She defied traditional gender roles. She negotiated complex political alliances, commanded armies, and ruled Egypt with remarkable autonomy for a woman. But did you know that Cleopatra was actually the 7th Cleopatra?
I did know this.
Weirdos, did you know? I didn't think so.
I'd say most people do not know that. When they think of Cleopatra, like the Cleopatra, they think of, oh, she's the only one, but there's centuries of history there.
She's the 7th. There were 7 Ptolemaic queens named Cleopatra, all of them direct blood relatives, reigning in direct succession, which is crazy to think about.
That's just, I can't. Like and that family tree is a nightmare.
Ooh, yeah.
An absolute nightmare.
Yes. It's very messy, to say the least.
Kids, this is why we don't keep it in the family for certain things.
Absolutely. We're going to get into that, I promise you.
I'm so happy with myself.
Well, I do want to say that Cleopatra the 7th, that's the one that we think of, Her power and legacy was built up by a line of these ancestral Cleopatras. So I think they're very important to learn about. They had such keen ability to navigate politics and maneuver power dynamics. And ultimately, these Cleopatras made it possible for Cleopatra VII to rule Egypt without a man by her side.
Right. And I'm guessing we're going to be covering one of those Cleopatras, aren't we?
Today, we'll be learning the story of Cleopatra Syra, also known as Cleopatra I.
Ooh, yes.
She was a significant historical figure in her own right, though obviously she's overshadowed by her more famous descendant, Cleopatra VII. There is a lot that we're going to learn here today.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that was Shakespeare, part of Julius Caesar.
Absolutely. I think Shakespeare's writing really has influenced even today our collective idea of Cleopatra.
Absolutely, whether it's right or wrong.
It's right or wrong.
And it's mostly wrong.
I think so too.
But like generally kind of correct-ish.
Good. He had broad strokes
Yes.
in there, but I feel like he wrote a character, right? So it made her a little more one-dimensional in some ways.
Right. Shakespeare was like a master at being a playwright, not a master historian.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
We all have our strengths and weaknesses.
I also, before we jump in, want to say if you are watching this video on our Patreon, you will see a little doggy butt next to me. We don't know why. Perry just insists on having his butt in the frame for this right now.
Like, it's never his face like lying on you. It's his butt.
It's his butt. And he has such a cute face, so I wish you all could see it.
But not as cute.
The butt, still pretty cute, Perry.
Oh.
Oh, gosh. He just kicked me away. Okay. And before we dive in, I need to give some context here. This first bit of context is context on the names of this episode. So the Hellenistic Greeks did not use an ordinal numbering system for their names. So that means they didn't say Andrew the First, Stephanie the Second. They didn't use 1, 2, 3. They used different things to differentiate which ruler they're talking about, like a moniker to identify, oh, that's so-and-so the Great, or that's so-and-so the Silly Billy, whatever it was.
Yeah, like Ptolemy the First Soter, and then like all those guys.
And we'll be hearing those a lot throughout the episode.
Seleucus the First Nicator.
There you go. Thank you.
Okay, I'm done, guys.
Contemporary scholars are the ones who've assigned that ordinal system to help keep things straight, right? Because you're going to see there's a lot of repetition of names over and over again. And just to make matters more confusing, we often will refer to rulers of the Ptolemaic dynasty by both.
Right. That makes sense. And I've always seen it written out that way.
So bear with me. There's going to be a lot of repetition here. And then let's go into a little bit of her background. So in 193 BCE, the name Cleopatra entered the Ptolemaic dynasty for the first time because of a 20-year-old, more or less 20-year-old Seleucid princess.
Ooh, very nice.
And why was this name important, Andrew?
Because Cleopatra, like the OG Cleopatra before Cleopatra I, was the sister of none other than Alexander the Great.
That's exactly right. She was his only full-blooded sibling, and he loved her very much, apparently. They were close. And any connection that you could make to Alexander was very prestigious, right?
Absolutely.
Everyone wanted to align themselves with Alexander the Great in some way.
Yeah, he created this empire, like kind of within a 12-year period, like one of the greatest empires to ever exist, even by today's standards, but certainly by then their standards.
Absolutely. And I want to tell you a little bit about the name, just because I find this interesting. The name Cleopatra is actually, even before Alexander the Great's sister, we see it in a lot of Greek mythology. It's the name of different characters and different myths. And it's composed of two Greek words, kleos, meaning glory, and pater, meaning father. So Cleopatra more or less means the glory of her father.
Yeah.
That's quite a name to live up to.
That really is.
Luckily, our Cleopatras do, for better or worse. So our Cleopatra here for today, Cleopatra Syra, she was actually known as Cleopatra Syra in her time.
Oh, wow.
That's what they called her
Yeah.
in Alexandria because it meant like Cleopatra the Syrian.
That makes so much sense.
She's a Syrian princess. And she was born in or near Antioch, Syria, between 209 and 204 BCE.
Okay.
With her, unfortunately, we're not as clear on the dates.
Right.
She was the daughter of the Seleucid king Antiochus III.
Oh, wow. I think he was the great.
I'll get into that a little bit. She was the wife of Ptolemy V, the mother of Ptolemy VI, Cleopatra II, and Ptolemy VIII, also known as Potbelly.
Oh, I don't like Potbelly.
Mm-mm.
No one likes Potbelly.
There really should be a whole episode on Potbelly, though.
I know. We might have to.
Yeah. So outside of her relational titles is how I chose to phrase it, outside of being a mother and a wife and all of those things, we can see that you'll see through this story that Cleopatra Syra had really strong diplomacy skills. And as a result, she was one of the first Ptolemaic queens to rule independently. And she was able to even mint coins in her own name.
I know. And she wasn't even a Ptolemy.
She wasn't even a Ptolemy. She was a foreign queen.
That's so incredible. Wow.
It's a big deal.
But yeah, you're right, though. Like, it really plays to her strength that her name is Cleopatra. Like, even though Alexander had been dead for over a century by this point, it doesn't matter. Like, she had that connection. I mean, through Seleucids, themselves, they were originally Macedonian general as well. Or Seleucus the first was.
But you're right. I think the reason her name is so powerful is because of, for our modern understanding, it's like the branding.
Yes, really. No, that's such a good way to put it.
And the Ptolemies were really, really good at branding, really good at PR.
They really were. That's such a great way to put it. Oh my God.
And as Andrew just mentioned, and as he mentioned in his episode on Alexander the Great's tomb, which we did fairly recently, when Alexander died in 323 BCE, his giant empire was divided amongst his relatives and his strongest generals, known as the Diadochoi.
Yeah, or the Diadochoi, the Diadochoi.
Oh, Diadochoi.
I like that pronunciation.
That sounds cooler.
Sounds cooler, yeah.
Okay, Diadochoi, which means the successors.
Right.
So as a result, there were 3 large kingdoms that came to control the Hellenistic world. Macedon, ruled by the Antigonids, is how I read it.
The Antigonids.
Oh, Antigonids. See, I haven't heard a lot of these names pronounced. I've only ever read them.
Oh, yeah.
Egypt, under the Ptolemies, and the Near East and the Middle East, ruled by the Seleucids.
Yeah.
For today's episode, we're going to be focused on the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, much more on the Ptolemies, obviously. And I want to say, just in case, I don't know, this is your first episode or you're just sort of diving into history, Hellenistic rulers means that these are dynasties of Greek-speaking monarchs that would ethnically be Greek, right? But they're ruling outside of Greece.
Yeah, exactly. And it's usually like a fusion over time. Like, you kind of like Greek culture mixed with Egyptian, mixed with Syrian, mixed with like Babylonian,
Yeah. It's interesting to see, the more you look at it, the different phases of that in Egypt. There were obvious phases where there was more separation between the Hellenistic Egyptians and the native Egyptians. Then there were periods where it was starting to merge together a little bit more. I just think that's fascinating.
Right.
So the Seleucids ruled over, more or less, modern day Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Israel, Jordan, Armenia, Kuwait, Iraq, Azerbaijan, and parts of eastern Turkey. Whew.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It was big.
Yeah, it really was.
The Ptolemies ruled over the Ptolemaic kingdom, which is primarily ancient Egypt, with their capital being in Alexandria, a city founded by...
I'm going to go on a limb here and say Alexander the Great.
Yeah.
Even though I knew that answer already.
And while their kingdom is centered in Egypt, they did have different territories as well beyond Egypt, which include Cyprus, that's an island in the Eastern Mediterranean, I have no idea how to pronounce this next one. Cyrenaica.
Oh, Cyrenaica.
Cyrenaica. This is more or less a region in present-day Libya, parts of the Levant, and parts of Anatolia. That's present-day Turkey-ish. But back to our girl Cleo.
Yeah, let's hear about Cleo here.
So that was the context for what came before her and the world that she was around. And as I mentioned, she's the daughter of a famous warrior king, Antiochus III, who was known in his lifetime as Antiochus Magnus. As you said, that means the great.
Yeah, and they don't bestow that moniker lightly.
No, not at all. Her mom, apparently to their present day peers, was just as renowned as her dad.
Oh.
Her name was Laodike.
I don't know anything about her.
I've heard her name a lot in the Hellenistic world, and I think it's after her. I think people name their daughters Laodike after her.
Wow, that's a huge deal.
Mm-hmm. She's the third Seleucid queen of that name, but she's the most famous. And she's a princess of the kingdom of Pontus on the Black Sea.
Yes.
And of course, she's also Antiochus's first cousin.
Of course.
As well as his wife. But
man, I really hated that they did this.
FYI, there's going to be way worse incest to come.
Yep, way worse.
If you don't like incest, the Ptolemies are not for you.
The Ptolemies are not for you. That is true. Pretty much like all of these Hellenistic kingdoms, especially like as time goes on, it gets worse and worse.
Yeah, it's just if it's really like too icky for you, of course it's icky to everyone, I would just skip them.
Yeah.
So our Cleopatra's mother, Laodike, being such a revered queen, I think she's just really loved by the people, is really cool to see, because I feel like that's the seed of very strong female rulers that are going to follow in this line of Cleopatras.
Ooh, that's insightful.
Mm-hmm. So Cleopatra I was one of 6 kids, 3 boys and 3 girls, and she was the second eldest daughter. From what we can tell, the family was actually pretty close during Cleopatra's childhood.
I'd say so.
No, not like that. And her situation, the Seleucids don't have a history of sibling marriage at this point, like the Ptolemies do. Just so you know, at this point, it's about to change, but the Ptolemies were the ones that were really pro-incest, and I will get into the reasons why.
Yeah.
But obviously, for Cleopatra, nannies and servants would have raised her and her siblings. That's just the way things were done for a royal household. But what is interesting is that Antiochus III had his family always travel with him. On campaigns or in times of peace, they were always together, living in tents together, which was rare.
Yeah, you saw that a lot with the Achaemenid Persians. Obviously, the Achaemenids don't exist anymore. Maybe that's where he got it from.
That could be, yeah. A lot of these really impactful monarchs did know their history well.
That makes sense. Yeah, that you have to know that, like, especially if you're a Hellenistic ruler, you need to know about Alexander. That's where all begins for them.
Exactly. We think that Cleopatra VII knew her history of Egypt and of her ancestral Cleopatras very, very well.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
I just can't believe that. And again, I'm sorry to kind of go off the deep end here, but Cleopatra VII, the only Ptolemaic pharaoh to speak Egyptian.
I know.
Isn't that insane?
It's so dumb. It's so dumb. The fact that she's the first one to be like, you guys, I think we should speak Egyptian.
And then their line ends.
It's a bummer.
It's a huge bummer.
Yeah. But staying in the Seleucid Empire for a little bit, I want to just emphasize how big this empire was.
Oh, it was massive. The
family was always traveling. We think that they possibly had up to 15 million subjects.
Yeah, like think about it from a geographical point of view. They had dominion sometimes all the way to the eastern Mediterranean shore, all the way over to like almost like present day Pakistan.
Yeah.
Like it was massive.
Massive. So she would have grown up, Cleopatra, traveling all over those regions.
Yeah.
So whether we don't know a lot about what her education looked like, we can assume that it involved a lot of like understanding like basically like courtly behavior and manners and things like that. But I think her informal education would have been amazing as well, just having traveled so much and seen so many different subcultures.
That's such a good point. Like the applied learnings would have been invaluable for her, because she would have, I mean, again, like over such a big area, you're going to see a lot of different peoples and their customs, and you're going to understand like how politics works in that region versus another part of the empire.
That's way better than any sort of schooling.
Oh yeah,
anyone
absolutely.
could go to.
I mean, that's real life. That's real world, like how to rule, basically.
And again, I wish we knew more about what her life growing up looked like, and was she formally educated in other things? We don't know. And as we've discussed on this show before, the reason we tend to not know or have a lot of sources about women's lives is because just men didn't think they were worth writing down.
Yeah, I mean,
not even if you were a princess.
Absolutely. I mean, it was like most people are not going to be written down, and then like of those people that are, it's going to be like royal or upper class men. Like almost always. Never going to be children or women.
Yeah.
Very rarely, I should say. Not obviously, not never.
And even a child that's a boy that is set to be a ruler, you're going to learn a lot more about him than any woman surrounding him.
That's also true.
I do want to share this one thing. I heavily referenced a certain book for this episode. That's one of the things that inspired the subject. And that book is called The Cleopatras, The Forgotten Queens of Egypt. It's the first book to ever write about all 7 Cleopatras in a single book.
That's really crazy.
Which is so crazy to me. And that book was written by the historian Lloyd Llewellyn Jones. And in the book, there's a part where he references Sappho. That's the Greek poet that Andrew covered in another episode. And a lot of the themes of Sappho's writing are about girlhood and how girlhood is so happy and romantic and carefree, particularly for Greek women, Hellenistic women, where there were really strict gender roles. So he quotes Sappho a couple times, and it's really beautiful. And then he adds this little bit of context that I wanted to share here. He says, "We can only assume that Cleopatra Syra and her sisters would have had something akin to this happy, if fleeting, girlhood. Certainly, Cleopatra Syra's lifestyle as an unmarried girl would have been profoundly different from her life after marriage, when the burden and expectation of fecundity was placed on her." And fecundity, because I had to look it up, means fertility.
Oh, I did not know that word either.
Yeah. It's important to know that a princess who would eventually become a queen was expected to give birth, but to not just give birth to multiple children.
Yes, absolutely. This was like a common theme going back, even by this point, like 3,000 years.
Exactly.
Like in this area, like it, in fact, there are old Sumerian hymns that we still have to this day that are like 4,500 years old that basically say like, oh, to the one woman who died, like she went to hell. Or
like she didn't have kids?
Yeah, she didn't have any kids. And then the one woman who only had one kid, basically one step above hell. And then it goes to like the woman who had like a dozen kids is like exalted for all eternity and stuff like that. It's wild.
It's so wild. In Cleopatra's world, being fertile is revered so much more above being smart, being kind, being capable, being pious. Like all of that is nothing compared to being able to have kids, which is obviously an enormous amount of pressure, particularly because fertility, as we now know, is largely out of our control.
Right.
Not entirely. Of course, there are lifestyle things that we can adapt, but most of it's just out of your control.
And most of it's just genetics,
It's
right?
just genetics.
Or just luck even.
Or you could have a husband that's sterile, but you're the one that's going to get screwed over if that's the case.
Yeah.
So it was a big burden for her to carry. Having a shit ton of kids just would have been her number one priority. That would have been drilled into her from a very young age.
Right. That makes so much sense.
So sad. And we can see that this is illustrated by the fact that Cleopatra Syra and her sisters don't even appear in the historical record at all until they're old enough for their dad to start marrying them off to the highest bidder.
I'm just looking at the camera like,
We
that's
know about their
insane.
brothers,
Of course.
but them, not until they're of marriage age do we start to learn about them. Antiochus III, for example, this is a whole side story that I'm not going to get into, but his eldest daughter, Cleopatra's older sister, he repeatedly actually gets the chance to sell her off because she gets married and then that husband dies. So she comes home and he's like, perfect, I get to marry her off again.
Oh my God.
And then
She's just a political pawn.
She's his pawn. I think that's what princesses were.
Yes, they were like a bargaining chip.
Mm-hmm. So Cleopatra Syra eventually is arranged to marry Ptolemy V, as we know. And this is actually as a part of a peace treaty, ending the Fifth Syrian War.
Yeah, they always fought each other.
Always.
Usually over like the Levant or like maybe southern parts of like Syria.
Yes.
It's really annoying.
It's very annoying.
It's like you guys, it's like squabbles. That's the best way to put it, because it's never any sort of like, oh, like we were really wronged. It's really just like, oh, we need to find a justification war because they're weak right now, and I really want this land. That's really what it is.
I just want to have more land than I already do, which is so much.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
pretty much. That's the way all of these wars can be summed up, kind of like that.
So the marriage was a part of the peace treaty, and it was also a strategic move because Roman aggression started happening in the Mediterranean. And these two kingdoms were like, okay, just in case we got each other's backs, right? Like marrying our kids together means we will support each other.
That's actually such a good point, because this is the time where like Romans have like defeated Hannibal. Like they are now kind of like the masters of the Western Mediterranean and really starting to like poke their head into Greek affairs and into affairs in the Balkans. I mean, I guess for this point, it had been decades, and they are really starting to become more power players. And within like a generation, they would become masters of Greece. Within
a generation, yeah. We see, I'm not going to get into it, but if you read the book, you'll see that by the time Cleopatra Syra's kids are young adults, Rome is like Big Brother.
Yeah.
Like you go to Rome for permission for things, you go to them for help, you go to them, you beg forgiveness. They are the top dog.
Which I've always wondered, when we get a little bit of knowledge into this, but I'm always wondered about like, what did Greeks think about that? Like they were the top dogs. They had Alexander was a Hellenistic guy. Now all of a sudden to them, they're like these semi-barbarians, right? They were never seen as full barbarians by the Greeks, but semi-barbarians for sure. And they have to go and ask them for like, hey, can you help us with this? Help me? Even Polybius, I mentioned him, he writes in like the mid to later 1st century BC, so a little bit later than this, and his audience is Greek people to help them understand then how did these barbarians, more or less semi-barbarians, like come to conquer like our known world. Like, and he kind of tries to justify it. It's really interesting.
So there must have been some resentment there.
There must have been. Yeah.
Walmart has the trusted brands and products your kids need for school.
Like HP Chromebooks?
Yep.
Reebok hoodies?
Yep.
Pokemon pencil cases?
I think you know the answer, but just in case, yes. Go back in style with Walmart.
Whether you're working out or working on your high score, you never settle for less. So why should it be any different when you choose your protein drink? Rockin' Protein comes in 3 delicious flavors, has 30 grams of protein, and is always made with fresh milk, so you're never left with that chalky taste. Rockin' Protein. Never settle for less than a great-tasting, high-quality protein drink. Visit rockinprotein.com to find Rockin' Protein wherever you are. Rockin' Protein and Shamrock Farms are registered trademarks of Shamrock Foods Company.
Well, getting back to their wedding, for Cleopatra and Ptolemy, that's everybody's name. I'm just going to just say that.
So true.
These versions, they're married in Raphia, which is where the Ptolemies and the Seleucids had previously battled during this 5th Syrian War. So it was a very symbolic choice for a place to have a wedding. And the wedding festivities would have taken a week, which is wild. I know even today a lot of cultures are like that, but it's interesting to see how ancient those traditions are. And then after the wedding, Cleopatra Syra is sent to Alexandria, of course, and she would have traveled there with an entourage of women that she knew and trusted from the Seleucid Empire to help her feel a sense of community and safety, because she is a foreign queen in a foreign land now. She leaves, she's now queen of Egypt, and she would actually never see her parents again.
So like at 20, she was like, see ya never.
See you never. Guess I gotta go start being queen.
Being queen, yeah, of like a foreign land.
And from the outset, when she arrives in Cleopatra, when she arrives in Alexandria, it's really important that even though she is or was a Seleucid princess, which is a big deal, she needs to display loyalty to her husband and to this land and this country, because people tended to not like foreign queens.
Oh, yeah.
It was seen as suspicious, right? Or is she gonna essentially influence the pharaoh to not prioritize our needs and what's in the best interest for Egypt?
Right.
And she needed to Egyptianize, basically. She needed to assimilate as much as possible. She needed to eventually be seen as one of them.
Yes, absolutely.
And Weirdos, she does her job very well.
I'm guessing you're going to tell us more here.
Yeah, she becomes so loved by the people.
Oh, nice.
It is so impressive. One piece of evidence that we have, early piece of evidence that shows that things were going well for her pretty early on, is that her husband, Ptolemy V, officially recognizes her as his sister. And this is weird for us, weird in the bad way. But for them, it's an honor that he sees his wife as his sister, because it is in line with their tradition of sibling marriage, which I will get into a little bit later. And then additionally, we know that an assembly of priests held at Memphis in 185 BC granted Cleopatra all the honors that Ptolemy V was given.
Oh, that's a huge deal.
That is a huge deal. And we know this because it's inscribed in the Rosetta Stone.
That's so legit.
Isn't that crazy?
That, like, I think Napoleon, right, found, or someone close to Napoleon.
I think so.
Like
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is so crazy to think about.
So insane.
Here are two examples of decrees that were written that mention Cleopatra Syra. Okay. So the first is, quote, "The king of Upper and Lower Egypt, the son of Ra, Ptolemy and his wife, the female ruler, the lady of the two lands, Cleopatra, the two gods made manifest, have been doing a very good thing in Egypt."
Wow, they even both refer to both as gods.
Gods.
That is pretty extraordinary.
Calling her lady of the two lands, by the way, shows that she has been accepted as one of them.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Because of the Upper and Lower Egypt, Egypt always sees itself kind of as like these two kingdoms smooshed together. So it really acknowledges like, oh, she gets our ways. She's the lady of both lands.
That's so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. And you're right. They definitely do see her as one of them.
Mm-hmm. Here's the second decree. It says, "The queen, lady of the two lands of Egypt, Cleopatra, the sister and wife of King Ptolemy, gave presents of silver, gold, precious stones in great quantity for the other statues of the goddesses of Egypt, making sacrifices, pouring libations, and the rest of the ceremonies performed in the temples of the gods and goddesses of Egypt." So they're like, she's so generous. She understands like our religious ways, right? She's practicing the Egyptian pantheon. They just have really nice things to say about her.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, the decrees show us she's really highly regarded and that she's really close to her husband, that he's not threatened by her. He sees her kind of as an equal. The fact that he wants her mentioned at his level with the same honors as him in these decrees.
Yeah,
he could have very easily left her out.
That is really interesting. reminds me of a little bit of Akhenaten, ironically enough.
How
Especially,
so?
The fact that he elevated Nefertiti to his level, maybe not quite to this level, I will say, but like almost as an equal.
It's really interesting. I wish we knew more about their relationship.
Yeah, it sounds like they were seen, or at least they treat each other more as a partnership.
Yeah, it really sounds like it. She basically is excelling at the role that we talked about that she would have been raised for, be a good queen, be a good wife, all of those things. And then the best thing for her reputation and for her safety, to be honest, is that she proved to be fertile. She gave Ptolemy V 3 children. These are surviving children. I think she had more births, but they didn't survive. 2 sons. So that's good because you want sons.
Right.
Daughters are nice too, but you definitely want sons. And 1 daughter. And her daughter is given her name, Cleopatra II.
Aww.
So we have 2 Ptolemies and a Cleopatra.
Of course.
Why they would name both sons Ptolemy, I don't know. One is Ptolemy VI and the other one is Ptolemy VIII.
And 8th is Potbelly.
Yeah.
I don't like Potbelly.
Yeah. So there must have been a 7th that passed away in there.
Okay.
And then, pretty surprisingly, in 180 BCE, Ptolemy V dies.
Oh man, that's pretty early on.
And we're not really sure of the circumstances of his death. He's 30 years old.
Oh wow, that's really young.
So he's really young. And at that point, Cleopatra Syra acts very quickly. She may have been grief-stricken. I can imagine she was. Whether she had romantic feelings for him, I don't know, but that's definitely her partner. But she's like, I gotta move quick. And she makes her 6-year-old son, Ptolemy VI, the pharaoh. But he's 6, so he can't rule, right? So even though he's crowned king, she is his co-regent. And by co-regent, it means that she's actually the pharaoh. Because you're not co-ruling with a 6-year-old.
No. I mean, can you imagine a 6-year-old actually running like an entire country? It would be really funny. Disastrous for like the normal person, but kind of funny in retrospect.
Yeah, I agree. She's actually the first Ptolemaic queen to rule without a husband. Isn't that interesting?
Oh, I didn't know that. Wow, that's interesting.
In documents from this period, Cleopatra is then named Thea Epiphanes, which means the manifest goddess.
Wow, so they really loved her.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's the queen of the people.
Once she's on her own, they're like, actually, we need to up-level you to the manifest goddess.
Wow, so it sounds like Ptolemy V was actually like kind of a pretty good ruler in his own right, and then he's just completely getting outshone by his, surviving wife.
His Syrian wife.
Yes,
Charming the pants off everybody.
Yeah, Seleucid princess.
It's pretty cool. And when she is co-regent with her son, it's interesting that whenever you see decrees and things like that of her and her son, her name appears first. Which you're thinking, yeah, she's the adult. Why wouldn't it?
Yeah.
No. In their time, in their culture, even a 6-year-old boy, his name would absolutely appear first before his mother because he's a boy.
Right.
Because he's meant to be pharaoh.
Yeah.
The fact that her name appeared first shows that people liked her rule.
Interesting.
Yeah. So again, we don't know the details, but we do know that she was a big positive influence on Egypt.
Right.
And then coins are minted under her name. There are coins minted in the joint authority of her and her son. I think there are even coins minted just for her.
Wow.
So then after all of this is going on, right? But going back a little bit, after her husband, Ptolemy V, dies, Cleopatra Syra decides it's time to go back to the old Egyptian way of doing things, or the old Ptolemaic way of doing things, I should say. She announced that her son, Ptolemy VI, was going to marry his sister.
No.
Cleopatra II. This tradition had fallen to the wayside when Ptolemy V became king because he didn't actually have a sister to marry. And that's how our girl ended up here in the first place, because there was no sister. But even though she's from this different kingdom, Cleopatra I was all about keeping the Ptolemaic traditions alive. Remember, she had to show that she was loyal to them, not to the Seleucids.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I never thought about it that way prior to this.
She wanted to make sure that her son married, someone in the family. And luckily he had a sister, luckily for them. She would not have wanted him to have any foreign brides, even though she was a foreign bride herself.
Some people just walk through doors and close them.
Close them for others.
Yeah.
That's not leaning in, Cleopatra. So why was sibling marriage important to the Ptolemies? Well, it's a great question. In the Egyptian religious context, this relationship is meant to mimic the relationship of Horus, the god Horus, and his mother lover Isis.
Yep.
Yeah. I wrote yuck in my notes. It's important to note that incest was not common or accepted amongst the native Egyptians or the Hellenistic Egyptians.
Right.
Everyday people were not marrying their siblings. That would have been very taboo. This was a tradition reserved for the royal family because the pharaoh would always be Horus's representative here on earth.
Yeah, he is like the living embodiment of a god.
They're deities, so it's different.
Yeah.
And since the gods were known in the myths to marry their moms, their sisters, their kids, so could the Ptolemies.
Right.
It's gross, you guys. In case you didn't notice, it's gross, but that's what they did.
Yeah, it's pretty gross.
This is an aside. This is not in my notes, but that's also why I think it's funny that we grew up with the understanding that Cleopatra VII was super beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think so.
No, I don't think she was. I think she was fiercely intelligent, and she could probably charm the pants off anyone, man or woman.
But she came from a long line of sibling marriage.
Yeah.
Basically, from here on out, everyone's marrying their siblings. That's going to have consequences on your looks, for sure.
Well said. Well said.
Luckily for her, it didn't have consequences on her mental faculties.
Right.
So that's nice. So we have a sibling wedding planned. Everyone's happy, right? The future's looking good.
I'm not happy about this.
That's okay. But alas,
You said that way too fast.
some bad stuff is on the horizon here.
Of course there is.
Of course. So prior to his death, Ptolemy V was preparing for war against the Seleucid kingdom.
That must have been really awkward.
Mm-hmm. Some people suspect that is the reason he died.
Ooh.
That he was poisoned. Some people suspect Cleopatra of having done that. I don't think so, just because we don't have evidence for it. It sounds good, but I don't think so. But basically, it wasn't a smart war on his part. I won't get into the details because I don't know them. I don't remember. But it would have been really costly, and people were tired of these wars with the Syrians. They're like, oh my God.
Like,
chill.
yeah, like what's the point of this?
What's the point? Yeah. So it's possible that someone else in his court may have poisoned him. So then when Cleopatra I takes over, she prioritizes peace with the Seleucids, likely because she is one. It's her brother on the throne at this point.
Yeah, she'd be like, yo, chill.
Mm-hmm. So they manage peace agreements, and this helps her actually really like consolidate power at court around her. The fact that she's basically giving them what they want as well. She's like, you guys don't want war. I don't want war because that's my brother. We're not doing it. So the people around her really are like, okay, yeah, we won't kill you. Don't worry.
I bet she's like, thanks.
Thanks, guys. And then Cleopatra does pass away rather suddenly, but it does seem to be of natural causes, either in 178 or 177 BCE.
Oh, wow. I didn't. Okay, so she dies pretty early on as well.
Mm-hmm. But there doesn't seem, I didn't see anything about suspicions of foul play. So who knows? I don't know what happened. We know that as she was dying on her deathbed, she appointed these two guys, Eulaeus and Linnaeus, her associates, as regents to help her kids rule.
I bet it doesn't end well.
Mm-mm. They are really incompetent, and they quickly, I think unintentionally, escalate tensions with the Seleucids.
Oh my God.
And
so she just does all this work to like calm tensions, get peace, and then me.
This leads to the 6th Syrian War.
Of course.
Boo.
And again, another stupid war.
Another stupid war. And while I said we don't know a lot about the circumstances of her death, but we do know that by 164 BC, Cleopatra I was officially worshipped as a goddess in Egypt. They had special priestesses dedicated to her, which is a big deal. They had special rituals and ceremonies special for honoring her, which is a really big deal. And this means that she would have joined the ranks of the other great Ptolemaic queens. So not all of them are deified, but the great ones were. And it's just further examples of the honors that she's given.
Right, and the fact that she was loved by the people.
Yeah, they wanted to worship her.
Right.
And I'm going to give a quick summary. This is so quick, it's not even funny, of how effed up things got when she died.
So she's basically holding everything together, and we're going to see how it unravels. So like the not so fun, but still yet kind of fun part.
Mm-hmm. So her eldest son, Ptolemy VI, also known as Ptolemy Philometor, which means mother loving. It sounds gross, but that's what they did. He co-rules with his sister wife, Cleopatra II.
Yeah.
Eventually, this couple, they're incorporated into the Ptolemaic dynastic cult as Theoi Philometores, the mother-loving gods. So they double down.
Oh, wow.
They're not connecting themselves to their dad, which I think is interesting.
That is really interesting.
Their dad's the Ptolemy. They're connecting themselves to their mom.
Wow. So that is really letting us know that she remained important well after her death.
Exactly. Very good way of saying it. So they messed stuff up because they have those two advisors that don't know what they're doing. At some point, their uncle, the Seleucid king, comes and convinces Ptolemy VI, like, I'm not going to hurt you. We're family. Just let me take the lands that I want. And he's like, okay, I don't want war. And
oh my God,
the Egyptian people are pissed.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
I think they attack some of the guards at the palace. A lot of bad stuff happens. They're very unhappy with the young Ptolemaic couple because they're young and they don't know what they're doing.
And they have incompetent advisors.
Exactly. And so because people are unhappy with them as co-rulers at the beginning, because of these wars, and then there's rebellions within Egypt and things like that, they are forced to then share their rule with their younger brother, Ptolemy VIII, known as Potbelly, because I think he gets Rome to help them.
Oh.
He negotiates a lot with Rome. He leaves his will with them at some point as well when he gets older.
Oh yeah, that within probably the cult of the Vestal Virgins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So he's known as Potbelly because he's a bigger person. Apparently all the Ptolemies were overweight because it was a symbol of their status to be overweight, but he was overweight to an extreme that people looked down on. And he has a reputation for being very greedy and very gluttonous.
Wow.
So, Potbelly.
So he really does play the character well.
Yeah. And everyone just calls him Potbelly. Like, that's just what he was known as while he was alive, which I think is wild.
That is.
So Ptolemy Philometor and Cleopatra II, they don't like him. They don't like their brother at all because he's a psycho and a butt face, I think.
Wow, that's good analysis right there.
He basically forces, because he has support on his side, military support, he forces Cleopatra II to marry him as well. So she ends up being married to both of her brothers at the same time.
Oh my God.
But we're not sure if their marriage would have been consummated. We're not sure. Like, we just don't know. What we do know is that it looks like Cleopatra II and the non-Potbelly Ptolemy have 3 kids together. It seems to be kids of them.
So yeah.
They have Ptolemy Eupator, which means Ptolemy of the noble father. They have Cleopatra Thea, which is goddess.
Yes.
And she actually becomes the queen of Syria later on.
Wow, that's ironic.
Mm-hmm. And then they have Cleopatra III. They just keep using the same names.
I hate that when like ancient cultures would do this stuff.
Your siblings, why are you both named Cleopatra?
Yeah.
That would be so confusing. Unfortunately, at some point, Ptolemy VI dies. He dies, I think, in battle. I think he falls off his horse.
It's so embarrassing. Don't
quote me on that, but I'm almost positive that's what it is. So then Cleopatra II's like, great, now it's just me and Potbelly. So she's stuck with her creepy brother.
Yeah, her creepy ultra fat brother.
Ultra fat brother husband. And one day, the worst day, I would imagine, her daughter, Cleopatra III, comes to her and is like, guess what? I'm pregnant and it's my uncle's baby.
Oh, it's Potbelly's.
It's Potbelly's baby.
Oh my God, this is getting so disgusting. This is grotesque.
Her world must have been rocked. Like, what? My brother husband is sleeping with my daughter? Ew. And unfortunately, so then eventually Potbelly does marry his niece. So he's married to his sister and his niece at the same time. And then those 3 become co-rulers. It doesn't go well. And it's thanks to Potbelly and Cleopatra III that Egypt loses a lot of its power.
Mm-hmm.
He's not a good ruler. She is very smart, like her mom and her grandma, but he's kind of running the show. And she seems cruel, Cleopatra III, to be honest. They do some really messed up stuff together. If you guys want an episode on them, on Potbelly and his shenanigans, let us know.
Yeah.
We could maybe do a co-episode.
Yeah.
We could co-rule.
Co-rule an episode on co-rulers.
Yeah.
What could go wrong?
So much goes wrong, you guys. And it's so bad. They lose a lot of power. The Ptolemy that died before, Ptolemy VI, the mother-loving one, he's actually considered the last ruler of ancient Egypt when it was still in a state as a major power player.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. So Potbelly and onwards, it's just sort of the power is crumbling away from them.
Yeah, exactly. They're hanging on to what once was.
Exactly.
They're the shadow of what they used to be.
Such a good way of saying it. There is more drama in this little group than a telenovela, a soap opera, and a K-drama combined.
Wow.
So I highly recommend reading the book that I referenced, The Cleopatras, The Forgotten Queens of Egypt, if you want all the dirt on what went down. Or again, let us know if you want us to give you an episode on that.
I feel like we should do a bonus episode on that.
Ooh, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
It gets messy. So from everything we know of Cleopatra I, she was a very successful ruler, at least. Her kids kind of messed things up, but she wasn't there. So we can't blame her. She stepped up and took charge of Egypt when her son was too young and when she was grieving, and she did an amazing job. And even when her husband was still alive, we have good evidence to see that people would have seen her as an equal to him, which is incredible. And with such an impressive track record, it's no surprise that after she died, that's when the name Cleopatra becomes the name to use for females in the royal house.
That's insane. And you're right. Like, it just goes in a straight line, like 1 through 7.
1 through 7, everyone wants to be a Cleopatra because of her.
Wow.
Isn't that cool?
I mean, and she was only named Cleopatra because of just like, oh, some like woman that lived like 100 years ago or whatever.
Yeah, that, you know,
that
obviously
was Alexander the Great's sister,
Mhm.
right? She's important, but like she doubled down on that name, made it like doubly important.
Exactly. She made it a name of power for women. And even though we don't know a ton about like her daily life or kind of her own motivations and stuff, right, like that, she was so influential in maintaining power and influence for the Ptolemies, even though she wasn't one herself. She has quite a legacy as a capable ruler and a diplomat. And it's just really awesome to see powerful, celebrated female leaders in the ancient world. Or are you laughing at me playing with his feet?
You literally you're making your point and then like using Perry's foot.
It's like it's a gavel or something.
Yeah.
He doesn't seem to mind.
He really doesn't, actually.
So the more that you learn about Cleopatra Syra, the more you can see how she, and then the subsequent Cleopatras, paved the way for Cleopatra VII to be such a powerhouse and to be the icon that we're all still obsessed with.
Wow, you started off with like Cleopatra VII and then brought it back to her at the end.
Yeah.
It's all connected, man.
Exactly. So that is the story of the first Cleopatra.
That was absolutely incredible. I did not know even half I don't even think I knew quarter of the details.
Really?
Before this episode. Yeah.
Yay. Did I impress you then?
Oh yeah, 100%.
It worked.
Yeah,
Nice.
you did it. I know, and I also love it when you do episodes on the ancient world, because that's like my bread and butter. That's kind of like where my heart is. Even though I can cover a lot of different periods, that's where my ADHD just neurodivergence is just honed into. I think for the most part. So hearing a story that I don't have to research and is just told to me, amazing.
Yeah, that's how I feel about murder. Murder stories. Actually, we didn't say this at the beginning, and we should have. But if you're still listening, then you get the scoop.
Oh yeah.
Andrew and I watched this Netflix series called Alias Grace.
It was good.
It was really good, very haunting. It's based on a novel by Margaret Atwood, the woman who also wrote The Handmaid's Tale. And I just knew that. I was like, oh, it's based off her book, blah, blah, blah. I didn't realize that the Margaret Atwood novel is based on a true story of this woman, Grace, who is sentenced for killing her master and the housemaid.
Yeah.
And I shared that on our Instagram stories this week, just asking if others had watched the show. It seemed like a lot hadn't seen the show. And I asked you all if you wanted us to cover that in a future episode, and vast majority said yes. So that may be coming in the future as well.
Yeah.
Either as a full-length episode or as a mini-sode.
Yes.
So keep your eyes peeled.
Yeah, stay on the lookout, guys. It was fascinating.
It was fascinating. I'm interested to learn about the actual historical case.
Right.
And see how similar the two are.
I know, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
We'll need to do some research, guys. So that's it for this week. You guys, you know what to do. I mean, if you don't know, go to Instagram and make sure to not subscribe. You should follow us on Instagram. Subscribe to us wherever you listen to podcasts,
Yes.
whether that be on Spotify, on Apple. And you know what? Actually, just to share with you guys, it is kind of funny to me. A vast majority of you guys are on Spotify.
Yeah. A
Vast majority. So if you are listening on Apple, tell your friends, more of your friends, to listen on Apple.
Be an outlier.
Be an outlier. Yeah.
Don't follow the crowd. Or do, as long as you listen to our podcast.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Well, that is all we have for you this week, weirdos. Until next time.
Until next time, weirdos.
Adios.